the next section is 1.2 developments in Dar al Islam. So there, Dar al Islam, by the way, means
The
Muslim world. So unit 1.2, there's one caliphate you should know by name. And in case you don't know, the word caliphate just means a government run by, guess what type of leader?
Religious.
No, a government. Wait, what?
There's this word caliphate. A caliphate is a government that is run by a guy called a caliph. And so a government run by a caliph is a caliphate. There was another word we talked about, like a sultanate. A sultanate is a government run by a sultan. So there's different governments you should know that the Muslim world produced, but this is the most important one. It's called the Abbasid Caliphate. And sometimes it's so important that people say that this is actually like the golden age of Islam. And if there was a single city that you should know that is associated with this city, I think I called this like the Austin, Texas of the Middle East, because people went to study. It was multi-ethnic. Yeah, you should know, all the people that said this, that this is the city of Baghdad. That's the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate. And just like people go to Austin to study at the University of Texas, well, people also went to Baghdad to study at this place. And it's kind of like super obvious what's the name of this place of learning. It was a library / school. It was called the House of Learning. So that was like a super famous school. Yeah, House of Wisdom Learning. Depending on what translation you have, either one is okay. So regardless, people went to Baghdad to study. It was kind of a big deal. And there was something that was really important about Dar al Islam, because they ended up taking other people's cultural accomplishments, appreciating it, and helping spread it. So, for example, they were really into this culture's works, just like in our own time right now. There could be kids who are like into K-pop or into K-dramas, but they don't know Korean. And so if they want to know what the show is saying, they need to have the show in subtitles. Or you could dub it, but it's not as good as having, I think, right. So regardless, you have to have translation. And so the Muslims and the Abbasid Caliphate, they were really into the works of the Greeks.
Oh, my stomach.
My head.
So they were super into the Greeks, and so what they did is they translated those Greek works. And if they're going to translate them, man, what language will they translate them into? Which is like the language of the Muslim world. They're not going to take it from Greek and translate it into Greek.
Arabic.
They're going to translate it into Arabic, because Arabic is like the predominant language of the Muslim world. So not only are they taking Greek works and translating them to Arabic, but they're also taking something else and moving it around the world too. There's two things that they picked up from India that they helped to move around the world. Both have to do with math. One is
Arab or Roman numerals. Oh, I know.
Roman numerals come
Arabic
from
numbers.
Rome.
Algebra.
Yeah, and geometry.
Yes.
Arabic numerals and algebra. The word algebra itself is like, it's an Arab word, right? So they are actually not just taking Greek works, translating it and spreading it, but they're also taking stuff from India, things that we use every day, like Arabic numerals, and also the discipline of algebra. And there's another thing that Dar al Islam moves, something that is from China that is so useful, we're using it right now. Paper. So the big takeaway is Dar al Islam. The big takeaway is the Abbasid Caliphate helps spread knowledge and spread learning, whether that be Greek works translated into Arabic, whether it be Indian numbers and algebra, or whether it's the Chinese technology of paper. 15, I love the Mamluks, but I'm not going to talk about the Mamluks. You can cross out those Mamluks.
Is it going to be on the test? Yeah, I was going to say it's going to be on the
It is crossed out for a reason.
Nice.
So, number 16, there is a part of the world you should know called Andalus. And this is a part of the world that in the year 711 was actually conquered by Muslims, and they stayed there for 700 years. And over the course of those 700 years, the language of Al-Andalus has a lot of Arabic influence. The word sugar,
Spain.
the word shirt, the word scorpion, the word until, all comes from Arabic. Al-Andalus, another word for that is Muslim Spain. And it was that way, was ruled for about 700 years, and it influences the language.
Wait, so what, where is it?
Spain,
Okay.
That's
but
why-
The Muslims took it over.
right.
Okay.
And because the Muslims took over Spain, we call it Muslim Spain, Al-Andalus. This is like the main part of Europe that was conquered by Muslims. And it wasn't for just a little bit. 700 years, FYI, is a long time. And because of that, the Spanish language, how it exists today, could not exist without all the Arabic that's inside of the Spanish language. But listen, Spain isn't the only place that Muslims wanted to conquer. They also wanted to conquer the country that touches Spain
Portugal.
to the northeast,
France.
France. Now, the thing is, though, about that, is the Muslims were actually stopped at a place called the Battle of Tours. Muslims were stopped from taking France. So this was kind of like a big deal because without that, France would have been Muslim. Without this, Germany would have been Muslim. The Battle of Tours in 732, Muslims were stopped from taking France. There was a battle, and the Muslims lost. The Muslims fought this European army with knights and horses, and it was just something the Muslim army was not able to successfully, get a victory at the end of the day.
And you said it was the Battle of Tours that made it.
Yep, Muslims were stopped at the Battle of Tours from taking France. That's 1.2. Let's go to 1.3. Developments in South and Southeast Asia. Real quickly, if I ever mention South Asia, what modern day country does that line up with?
India.
That is India. You could even include Pakistan. That would also be appropriate because I don't know if you know, India and Pakistan actually used to be one country. If I say Southeast Asia, this is going to be countries like Indonesia,
I can say it like that.
because my spelling is atrocious. Also, Cambodia
Laos.
and Vietnam. That whole general area is Southeast Asia. Just to give you FYI. You know what is not Southeast Asia?
China.
China is actually, you know what part of Asia?
East.
Hey, yeah. So FYI. So in Unit 1.3, there's a relationship between Islam and India. Something really important happens in Unit 1.3 because you know what? Islam's on the move. Islam's expanding. Islam's getting, more and more areas are converting. So guess what Muslim forces do to India?
Destroy it.
There's no more India today.
Oh, wait, no, they conquered it.
They conquer India, and a Muslim minority rules. What's the majority religion in India to this day?
Hindu.
A Hindu majority. So Islam in India, Muslim forces conquer India. There is a Muslim minority that rules a Hindu majority. Now, if I've conquered India and I'm a Muslim, you know what? It'd be cool if there's something I could do to kind of like send the message that my religion, that my culture, that my values are superior. And there's something that Muslims tend to do at different parts of around the world. And one example of this is a Hindu temple in India, a former Hindu temple called Qutub Minar. And this was a building that was a Hindu temple, but when the Muslims came and took over, they did something to that Hindu temple as a way of showing Islam is the best.
They destroyed it and put something on top, right?
They built a mosque out of it. Exactly right. And that way, I can show you that your religion is actually nothing compared to my religion. They built a mosque out of it. You might remember there's another example of this, something that the Jews had in the city of Jerusalem.
It was the golden plate, right?
No, that's still it. Right?
Well, I think I'm thinking of mosque from the other one. Dome of gold.
Not the Dome of Gold. Sorry, I'll put it back up in a second.
So I knew, oh, never mind. I knew there was gold on something.
Oh.
So
Write that part.
you don't have to.
I've been writing down notes for like a while.
That's cool.
I didn't realize you were writing this until we came back.
So in general, in general, Muslims, what they'll do is whenever they take over an area, they will like turn that site into something of theirs. And so, for example, Qutub Minar, a former Hindu temple, they built a mosque out of it. Another example, I don't think I'm going to ask, but I'm just letting you know, another example is that there was a Jewish temple, and that was destroyed, and Muslims built the Dome of the Rock on top of it. Another example of Muslim influence in South Asia is Urdu, which is, it's a language. And it's used in modern day Pakistan. And the thing about Urdu, it was brought by Muslims. And one way I know that it was brought by Muslims is because we looked at a picture of Urdu, because in India, some people speak English. I think I showed you a sign in English. There's another language in India today called Hindi. It kind of has like block lettering, but there's a third language called Urdu. And the thing about Urdu and Hindi is that they sound the same, but they're written totally different because Urdu uses this alphabet. No.
Arabic.
It uses the Arabic alphabet. Just like you and I in English and in Spanish, what alphabet do they both use?
Latin.
Yeah, but they're totally different. If you just like, oh, I speak English so I can read Spanish, you can read it out loud and not know what Spanish says, even though it's the same alphabet. In the same way, Urdu uses Arabic letters, but it's not Arabic. It's a different language. This is an example of how Islam influences South Asia, the language of Urdu. This is going a little bit ahead, but what's another language that Islam helped create? Swahili. And I just want to go back, Spanish too. So man, Islam helped make modern day Spanish, Islam helped make Urdu, and Islam helped make Swahili. Seems like Islam's kind of important.
A little bit.
I'm not saying the best, but I'm going to say important. There's a group called the Bhakti movement, and these are actually Hindus. And they're super into things like poetry. Yes, sir. Yep. They're into things like dance. And you know what? If they're like into these things, they're kind of like these Muslims, because there are Muslims that are into these things too. There's a group of Muslims called the Sufis who are into the exact same things. Yeah, sorry. The Sufis.
Are you getting nervous? Why are you typing like that?
Number 22. Who wouldn't get nervous around Srivijaya, the greatest sea-based empire from 670 to 1025? Now, you might remember Srivijaya, they're important because they controlled this narrow strip of water like near modern-day Indonesia. And it was kind of important because they could tax all the ships coming in and going through. And Srivijaya connected two major civilizations. Like if I wanted to sail from this place to this, I had to go to Srivijaya. No, they're like in Indonesia. So they connected India and no, they are in China. So because if you wanted to go from India to China, China to India, you had to go through Srivijaya. It was a sea-based empire. I think we called that little strip of water they controlled a choke point, because if they control that little narrow thing, they control all the trade going between India and China. They were called the Srivijaya. There's another kingdom in Southeast Asia you should know. And there's two different names. They're called the Khmer or the Angkor civilization. Either way, they're actually in modern day, not Vietnam, but next to Vietnam. I've mentioned them to you already. They're in modern day Cambodia. And we actually have statues of their temple that we've looked at. And we've mentioned there's two types of statues we find in their temple. And they didn't actually, Muslims don't have statues. That's like the one thing Muslims would never have. They are Hindu, and then they became Buddhist. This is an example of how Buddhism moves by trade routes. So if you were to be asked, hey, what are some examples of trade and religion? Hinduism and Buddhism both moved to places like modern-day Cambodia through trade routes. There's Hindu statues and Buddhist statues in the Khmer civilization.
Wait, so it's an example
of how Hinduism and Buddhism moved along trade routes, because Cambodia is like 1,000 miles away from India. Like that religion moved. It moved far. And it's not the only religion that moves along trade routes, because guess what? There's a particular job of people that moved the Muslim religion, and actually the number one group were merchants. Merchants moved Islam. It wasn't missionaries, though there were some. It wasn't soldiers, though they might have an influence. Actually, the number one group of people that moved Islam was merchants. Speaking of the Sufis, they were super tolerant of other religions. Oops. Open, respectful. They even read other religions' books. So the Sufis, I want to remind you, are what religion are they part of?
Muslim.
They're Muslim, but they read other religions' books. They're kind of like the hippies. They're like tolerant. They're like wanting peace. They want love. And a Hindu book of poetry? Sure, I'll totally read that. So the Sufis were super chill type of Muslim, and they still are to this day. 1.6. Mesoamerica is like Mexico and South. And in Unit 1.4, man, what kind of sacrifice makes them kind of different and unique? Oh, yeah, they practice human sacrifice. You might remember we watched the movie Apocalypto. And in the movie Apocalypto, they focus on the oldest group of Native Americans in Mesoamerica. What group of people were those? Not the Aztec, not the Inca.
Meccans. Or Maya.
The Maya, exactly. Thank you, Carla and others. The Maya. Now, there is a group of people called the Aztec, but they're like, pretty far later. But the Aztec, if we were to say they're in a modern nation, like what modern day nation do they live? Yeah, they're modern day Mexico. And you might remember that as they were in modern day Mexico, there's a problem because they built their capital city on an island in the middle of a lake. And they don't really have a lot of room to like farm enough food, so they have to have a solution. And their solution was they built something called chinampas. Chinampas, I don't know if you remember, are floating gardens. And they did that because there just wasn't enough land to like grow enough food. So this was just a way that they tried to, increase the areas that they could farm. These things were called floating gardens. They're called chinampas. Now, you might also remember that the Aztec also have a tributary system as well. But this tributary system is terrible because this tributary system, the Aztecs demand slaves for what purpose? Yeah, for sacrifice. So you know what? The Aztec, do you think they're loved by their fellow Native Americans? No. So what happens is when the white people show up, when the Spanish show up, the Spanish are like not ripping hearts out of chests. They do other bad things, but it's going to make the Native Americans hate the Aztec and say, hey, we're going to hook up with Cortez. We're going to help these conquerors. So it's not a good thing. There's another Native American civilization in this unit you should know called
Inca.
the Inca. And what modern day nation are they in South America? They're in Peru. And you might remember they actually don't tax people. Taxes where you give money to the government.
Oh, is that where the government gives and stuff?
The government does give you stuff, but and you have to do something for the government. So there's something called the mita, which just is a labor system for men for a couple months. So for example, every man in this room is going to spend like 3 months building bridges. Every man in this room is going to couple months farming for the government. Every man in this room is going to spend a couple months digging, whatever, building roads. So the Inca don't have taxes where they have money, but they do have the mita, which is a labor system, which says that every man has to give not money, but their labor and their time to build roads, to build bridges, to be in the army, whatever the case may be. Finally, for Unit 1.4, religiously, the Inca and many Native Americans believed in what's called animism. And if you've seen Pocahontas, the Disney cartoon, you know how she like talks to that tree. Spirits are in nature, they're in trees, even maybe animals, maybe even like a mountain, and a river. So that's animism, that you can worship their spirits in nature, in trees, animals. That's what the Inca and actually many Native Americans believed. That gets us through.
That's what I believe in.
And maybe you believe in that as well. Maybe you're talking to a tree like Pocahontas. We get
Where
that.
are you?
Well, and maybe some of you haven't yet learned to sing, and that's okay. 1.5, developments in Africa. So there is, of course, trans-Saharan trade. If there is an animal that's going to help make this possible, you might write down the camel. The camel, is it from Africa?
No, it's from like
It is from Arabia, okay. And so they bring in this new animal because, man, the camel is like perfectly situated for this trans-Saharan trade without a lot of water. And if there's one kingdom you should know by name from West Africa famous to be part of this trade system, it's what country?
Mali.
This Mali, right? And they had a ton of this material, so much so that whenever they drew images of black kings, they said, we're going to have a black king holding a piece of gold.
Is that Mansa Musa?
That will be Mansa Musa. He is also credited
smart.
from being the richest man. And when white Europeans thought, man, what image do you think of when you think of a black man? White Europeans said, oh, easy, a black man, super rich, because the richest person we know was a black man from sub-Saharan Africa.
So why did white people have so much beef with black people?
So that's a great question.
Doesn't make sense. Like, oh, he's rich, but I hate him.
Well, I don't think that was something at this time. At this time, Europeans were like, oh, we want to go find out what's going on in Africa. We want to be part of this trade network.
But,
And when you, like, if you depict people in racist terms, it kind of shows, like, what you think about them. Europeans were depicting black men, black leaders, black kings, black rulers as powerful and respectful. So at this time, and Mansa Musa, they were, like, respecting him.
how did he
Sundiata,
feel after, like-
good question. We'll get to that when we move on to the next semester. Sundiata had a nickname. This is the Lion King, and he started Mali. And his story may have been stolen by Disney without crediting him. Can you imagine that? And
I've
that
been looking
yeah.
down and seeing them like making it, and you're just like,
exactly. There's another influence of Islam. Not only was and also Mansa Musa, by the way, when he went to Mecca, he helped. There's a lasting impact. What is still true in Mali and West Africa?
It's still poor.
No, it can't still be poor
Oh,
because it was the richest in the world.
It's religious.
It is still lasting impact of Islam. Like Mansa Musa helped make it like super Muslim. And like he built schools, you might remember. There's also Muslim influence in East Africa. We've already hinted at the Muslim influence in East Africa. There is Swahili, which is a mix of Bantu and what
Hindi. No, not Hindi.
if there is one
Sorry.
if there's one Islamic language, it's not Spanish, it's Arabic. There is number 34, as we can finish these three before the bell, a Christian kingdom in East Africa. In fact, this is one of the oldest Christian countries in the world. If you tell these people, hey, Christianity is a white person religion, they'd be like, we've been a Christian.
Uganda.
No. They've been Christian before many white Europeans. In fact, we looked at they have churches they actually cut out of the side of mountains. You might remember, I think I showed you pictures of them. Starts with an E. It is Ethiopia. Super proud of you. And they still are super hardcore Christian. Indian Ocean slave trade. Slaves went to what country in the Indian Ocean?
India.
They went to India and they had various jobs. They were either soldiers or something else super sad for women.
Concubines.
Finally, 36, oral history. So in Mali, they don't have like a written book, like a whole bunch of written books about their history. So a lot of their stories, like about Sundiata, are passed by storytellers. This vocabulary word, a griot, is a storyteller. This is someone who tells the story of India. So we're stopping at 36, but there will be a video for the other ones as well. So you can go ahead and consult and you can check. There'll be other videos for each one. I will not be going over 82 to 100 because we actually did that yesterday.
Oh, so you're just gonna like leave it like that?
What?